Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Rodriguez from Carlsbad PD in New Mexico, almost 24 years total in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Rodriguez. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. What a great opportunity to interact with you and the things that you're involved with are things that are near and dear to the profession and any leadership in a position like mine, for sure.
Thank
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to it. I was hoping we could start with a little bit of background. So we were kind of laughing offline a little bit, and you're like, yes, it's Carlsbad, New Mexico, and 24 years. But did you always want to be in law enforcement? Did you always want to be in leadership? Give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, so I guess mine is a little bit of a unique story. I mean, I came up in a completely different environment, a lot like some of what you've experienced, coming from very humble beginnings, raised by a single mother, went through her trials and tribulations. And obviously that laid out the trajectory of our path and, adversity, challenges. Uh, Kind of figured out school early on. I think it was probably junior high. I was like, man, this education stuff's not so bad. And uh, happy to say that I had some success. I did well academically, uh, and I had a little brother. In fact, he's my big little brother. He's also been in several leadership positions across this state, and he really was a great role model for me, right? He was a first responder, EMS, and he kind of laid out a really good foundation as to kind of, hey, you know what? Maybe you didn't grow up trying to be a police officer, but you always had the attributes and the characteristics and morals and stuff like that to do well and have success. And he jumped into law enforcement a couple of years before I did, and I'd go out on ride-alongs with him. And he actually worked just outside of El Paso, Texas, right at the Texas-New Mexico border. And I'd go out on ride-alongs for him, and I'd listen to his radio traffic. I'd watch him while he was out on calls for service. He did a lot of things within the time that I rode with him. He was a canine officer, so I got to see that part of it. And I just thought it was really, really cool. And I got an opportunity to join law enforcement in 2002. And I started with a really small agency, right? And I'll tell you, as one sometimes can, in this profession, you think, man, it sure would be nice to work for a huge city so you could see all the specializations and the resources and stuff that they have and the budgets and the training and stuff. But I got to tell you, starting for a small law enforcement agency for me was probably one of the biggest blessings for me because it actually required that I go um, through the process, right? I didn't have the luxury of calling a detective unit or a SWAT team, or sometimes we handled calls without backup. And I got to tell you, from a learning perspective, some people learn differently. I'm the kind of guy that has to do it right, and having done it, I felt prepared me to. Then I transitioned over to a bigger size. Carlsbad, New Mexico's police department is considered probably a medium-sized police department in our state. So it did allow me to come in and I started in the patrol field, right? A lot of agencies called it field services. We call it, uniform. There's different names for it, but essentially you're out there, you wear this very similar uniform, you're in a marked police car, and you're out responding to calls. So through my progression, I stayed in the patrol realm for about 15 years. I promoted within the division itself. And then I had a very unique opportunity. I'd never been a detective. In fact, some of the lessons that I would probably say is I would have loved to have diversified my experience with other divisions. Not that I felt like I cheated myself having stayed in patrol, because the exposure there is nonstop. You interact with people and in crisis in different situations. I mean, at some point, you're first for most calls. And I got a really unique opportunity in 2018 to transfer to the Criminal Investigations Division. Although I'd never worked uh, as a detective, I did bring that management experience that I had acquired over years of service in patrol. And then as the Criminal Investigations Lieutenant, that transitioned into that became traditionally the department that ran our internal affairs or professional standards in investigations. So that gave me my first intro into that type of work. And I got to tell you, once again, another experience that just really, from a just the opinion of officers, anybody that does that, why would you ever come in to police the police, right? And but I never took it as that, right? Because that is one perspective, right? That you're dealing with personnel matters and that kind of stuff. And although the majority of the work is that, what I did get to experience was I often found that we were out there doing the things that we should be doing.
Mm.
And going through that process and being involved in that really helps give you perspective, right? And so I did that for a little bit. I promoted to become a captain in that division, the professional standards division, which then transitioned to, we called it the special operations division, essentially becoming the division that I had oversight all the high liability stuff, right? SWAT team, drug task force, criminal investigations division, professional standards division, training and recruiting division. Wow, all of those um, very critical divisions within an organization. I had the pleasure of serving as the captain from uh, I'm sorry, the first part of 2019 to the latter part of 2024.
Mm.
And I've had the privilege of being the Carlsbad Police Department Chief of Police since December of 24. And I currently sit here as the Chief of Police today.
Thank you for sharing. There's a couple things you said that I thought were really cool. One, what a huge compliment for your brother to say that you have the qualities of being in law enforcement and that who you are shows integrity and honor and trust and all the things that you're looking for. So I think that's such a huge compliment for him to say that you personified this or you had the qualities before you entered into this profession. But I'm also curious, do you think because you came from the background that you did and the childhood that you did, that it also gave you almost like a superpower walking into this profession, that you had a different perspective and you were able to maybe understand people or have empathy or even approach people in a different way because of your background?
I smile as you ask that question because it actually gives me goosebumps. So many times in your upbringings, you don't understand, or in the situation you're thinking, why me and why. I got to tell you, I often have these conversations with my children, and a lot of my experiences I draw from that. From I didn't have the American dream upbringing, right? And you hit the nail on the head. So many times I've reflected, and even when I was going through it in the moment, right, you think, surely, like, am I ever going to catch a break, right? Kind of deal. And yet, in this profession, I got to tell you, it gives me chills because I've had conversations. Um, my old baseball coach, I love him to death. I still have an interaction with him regularly, and he told me and my head football coach, I was having a conversation, thanking them for the opportunity, right? Thanking them for caring about this kid that potentially could have just been just another statistic, right? I checked off every other box in that realm, right? I was in line to go that direction. And I got to tell you, one of them says, Jesse, you were just a nerd undercover. And, it doesn't offend me. It really doesn't. And I never understood it a lot like, the things that I've had to reflect on from the way I was raised and the way my parents did things. And it wasn't your standard way of parenting, right? It wasn't I read this in a book, and all these studies and stuff that are happening in our society, right? And you fall into those studies and you realize, like, I took a couple of classes in college on sociology and psychology and stuff, and you often wonder, like, who does all this, right? Like, who's gathering all this data, but how they hit the nail on the head every single time about relationships, and you become who you surround yourself with. And I got to tell you, it's not very often that your little brother becomes a role model for you. And I got to tell you, kudos to him. I mean, he's gone out and achieved. He's got two master's degrees, a bachelor's. I got to tell you, I understand that this is not about necessarily, you're not interviewing him, but I got to give kudos where kudos is deserved, because I'll tell you, once again, we weren't supposed to have done it the way we did it, and yet we did. And you're absolutely right. I have found myself interacting with people, and I feel like I've already lived that story.
Mm,
Or you become the voice of hope, and that to me is the most valuable thing about this. Is like, hey, look, man, I'm not telling you my story because I heard it on a rap song, or I read it in a book, or I read it in an article. I'm telling you my story because I've lived it. And if I can do it, you can do it. And uh, surround yourself with people who lift you up. You know, don't be satisfied. Don't quit. Those kinds of lessons are the lessons that I've learned in my life, and absolutely have shaped who I am as a police officer, and essentially shaped who I am as a leader of an organization.
yeah. Yeah, you said, because I've had those moments too, and I think we all, in our hardest times, will ask ourselves the why. Why is this happening? Why me? And as you said that, I'm like, this is why. This moment right now, this role that you're in right now, this is why. I've said this on the podcast before, but I wish I had someone like you who could come up to me and show me that there was a different way. I wish that there was someone who could give me hope when I was little, and I didn't really have that. And so for you to be that for other people, that's the why. And we never want people to go through hard things, but for a long time I viewed it as such a negative, and now I view it as such a positive. Of course, like we don't want anyone to go through those things, especially as a kid, and we want, everyone to have the best opportunity at success. We don't want kids to turn into statistics, and we want everyone to, succeed. But when we do go through those things, can we be that support for somebody else? And so I love, one, first of all, thank you for sharing, your story, but I love that you have turned this into an opportunity to help others, because I think that that is so important. And I think it's so powerful for all of us and anyone who's listening to understand that our stories can change and maybe even save lives. If we're willing to be vulnerable, we're willing to share those things, we're willing to talk to people about it, it could be the very thing that somebody needs.
Yeah, that you bring up some really good points. I've always told myself, and as I interact with young people, one of the things that I feel like hopefully I can give back through my interaction with some people is to say, hey, look, let me be the person that was the test dummy, per se, right? Let me be the person that was the prototype. And let me tell you my story. And from my story, know this: you don't have to go through what I've gone through. Just know that it was a tough, tough road.
Hmm.
I'm the guy that sits here and tells you, hey, you know what? I've tried it, tested it, I've gone through it, and I've gone to get through it, right?
Hmm.
Because I used to have a friend, or I have a friend that says, sometimes you got to go through it to get through it.
Yep.
And I understand that, and it's huge to me. But you bring up some really, really good points. I've never forgot that I'm a work in progress in anything that I do, even currently. I don't have it all figured out, right? Uh, I'm not a subject matter expert in everything. The thing that I often have to remind myself is, as long as I know somebody is, as long as I may know you, and maybe in your capacity, you're a subject matter expert that I can rely on. And so I guess what I'm telling you is I walk into this profession and I continue to navigate the life knowing that I'm flawed, that I'm not perfect, and that I'll continue to make mistakes. And the reality of it is that I hope that those mistakes that I make, I can learn from them and share my experience.
Yeah. Well, I love how humble you are and that you don't forget where you come from. I think that those things are really valuable. I also think, and at least for me, I can speak from my own experience, and I think this really plays well into, talking about wellness and organizational culture. And I think when you can get to the other side of something, it allows you to have more emotional intelligence. It allows you to have more empathy for other people because you've been through it. You've been through hard things. And when you can start to understand when people are hurting, when you can understand that sometimes behaviors are not a reflection of the human, it might just mean that they're going through a hard thing, and you can connect to that and you can relate to that, then you can show up better for the people either within your community or within the organization and provide those resources that they need in order to get through whatever it is that they're going through. And it becomes this really positive cycle of all of us, going through hard things, getting through hard things, and then helping other people to get through their hard things. And I think the more we can have that, the more I think people are going to feel safe to go through struggles. Because I think right now, in the conversations I have, people are almost ashamed or they try to hide when we're going through stuff. And I think the more conversations we have and the more we can show up for people, everyone will understand that it's a normal piece of life. Obviously, there's going to be varying levels, within everyone's life. But I think that the more we can talk about it, the more we can show up for each other and we can be humble and we can say, hey, we're all flawed and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to have heartache and we're going to have times where we need to lean on each other, then people are going to feel like that's normal and it's not so stigmatized.
You bring up some really good points, and it can be challenging for leadership, right? And I think there's once again a stigma on the flip side of what you're talking about is that, right? That you're perfect, that all your bills are paid, that you and your wife are just madly in love with each other, that your kids are perfect, that I mean
Mm,
all the things that challenge us in everyday walks of life, but specific to this profession that is a time greedy uh, profession, right? I mean, there's just not enough time in a day in this profession as you navigate it, and you always tend to fall short, right? As far as can you be there for all the events and can you be there? So many times you find yourself being present for completely for strangers, yet you're not present for the people that are depending on you, that are related to you, and those and I got to tell you, you bring up a really good point. Man, if I can be an example of vulnerability, then that's one of the layers of my leadership that I want to be able to leave here in my legacy, is to say, you know what, I could have had a conversation with that chief and he kept it 110% real with me, and he was
mm,
honest with me. He said, hey, you know what, I may not necessarily have the answer, but how sure as heck give it hell trying to find the answer with you, right? And you speak to mental wellness and emotional wellness. Uh, you know, there's statistics out there, and anybody can research those as to the impact and to the trauma that law enforcement and first responders interact with and often left with. As I was preparing for this, listening to some of the things that you've put together, I got to tell you, that's the reality. It is, I think for many, many years, we were just working towards getting to the end, to the finish line, right?
mm,
I call it the pot of gold, right? Over the rainbow and get to the pot of gold. But so many times you hear, especially even in it, and it's touched here locally, right? Where someone retires after a career of success and, those kinds of things. And then here they are riddled with health issues, riddled with emotional issues, riddled with, unfortunately, even death. And, to give all of those years of service to be somebody else's rock, to be somebody else's resource, And then in those moments that you're going to retire and expect it to be there for your loved ones, you're not.
Mm,
One of the things that even today scares the crap out of me is to not be relevant. For 20 plus years, I've been relevant.
mm,
That's how this job has made me feel. For 20 plus years, I feel like I was in the know of the ongoings in my community. And that scares me as retirement is closer and closer. I share this with you because I would tell anybody, like, those are real things for me to not be relevant, to feel like I'm not giving back because that's all I've ever done
mm.
is give, right? Like, hold on, honey, I'll be home a little later. I got to talk to this complete stranger. I know, son, I know it's your birthday. Don't blow out the last candle till I get there, right? And I'm by far not the only person. This profession is that. It is time and family, loved one greedy. I speak to this all the time to our new recruits, and I say, hey, look, man, our biggest challenge in this profession is that work-life balance, whether it be through scheduling, through things like resources with wellness, and being able to give people time off so that they can do those things. And those are things that we're still trying to find that recipe for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I had a moment in my career and it really resonates with what you just said about that fear. Um, it was when I was transitioning to work with law enforcement exclusively. I had a very successful career in the wellness space before working with law enforcement. And I felt the same way you did. I felt needed, I felt wanted, I felt relevant. I had sacrificed my family life, my home life. I missed loved ones on deathbeds. Like there were a lot of things that I sacrificed that in hindsight, I shouldn't have, and but for me, it was everything. It was my career and it was the way I was gonna make it, whatever that means, But to me, I was like, I'm gonna make it. And I was making the decision to transition to working with law enforcement exclusively. And the whole time I was like, well, what is everyone gonna do without me? Like they're gonna be so sad and like, what am I gonna do? And what are they gonna do? And I made the decision to do it, and nobody cared. Like after like a very short period of time, it was like everyone stopped reaching out, life goes on, and it was very, very difficult. And it was like a hit to the ego for sure for me, where I was like, wow, like was I not as important as I thought, or was the work that I did not as important as I, maybe hoped it was? And I had to come to the conclusion that two things can exist at once. The work that you do can be extraordinarily valuable, and life can go on. Just because life goes on doesn't mean that there wasn't an impact. But I think for me, I wish that maybe mentally and emotionally I would have prepared for that proactively, and I would have, invested more into the other aspects of my life because it is like a door closing, but it doesn't have to feel like, and this is what I wish I would have known because this is not what happened. This is not what happened.
Yes.
I had a really hard time with it. Because as you would imagine, working with law enforcement and especially at the time, I really wasn't known, and everyone's like, who's this girl? So it's like starting from ground zero again, and you're like, okay, I'm kind of a nobody now, and working your way up. But I wish that I would have prepared myself to understand that there are other things that are worthwhile and there are other things worth striving for. And it's another chapter in life, even though one door is closing, others are opening, like the old saying about this. But I wasn't prepared for that. And so I do think there's more of a conversation now of how do we prepare people proactively for retirement. And I think the conversation is multidimensional. And you said this earlier, so I appreciated you saying that is how can we prepare everyone physically? How can we prepare everyone mentally, emotionally? How can we make sure that everyone is, preparing from a family perspective, a financial perspective? What does that look like in a proactive way so that when they do reach the end of the rainbow and they do finally retire, everything is intact as much as it can be. There's always going to be give or take with things, but I know that wellness is something that you guys have been focusing on organizationally to be more proactive to prepare everyone. When did that become a part of the conversation? And are you able to highlight maybe some of the either the things that you guys are doing or even just the conversations that you're having to get people to understand the importance of being proactive when it comes to their wellness?
I think this is one of the steps, Paige. This is, as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, is this one of my sessions? Is this one of the conversations that needs to happen for, and having it with the chief of police of an organization is really, I think, one of the first steps is so that it's okay. And somebody in my position to be having to have this interaction with you and have this conversation with you as you're talking, you're giving me goosebumps, right? Because it's it starts in these ways that people like me that have done it for the duration that I've done it are already having this conversation. And it's okay. It's a welcomed thing. And say, hey, you know what? Uh, let's start talking about what's it going to look like on the other side, right? You said two things. You talked about it's okay for people to move on. That's absolutely right. This is a job where relationships, interactions, you have to be in step with each other because you're out doing things, interacting with people, high risk situations. And when you phase out of that, then that relationship has to develop itself with the people that are currently doing it. And you cannot be greedy in the sense of thinking, well, how dare this or he or she forget about me because that was her and I or he and I doing that. Well, unfortunately, as you well know, in this profession, we have to be able to understand each other verbally, non-verbally, and that's really really important. I got to tell you, in the profession, there's been a huge emphasis. I've gone to many conferences in the recent past where they are having that conversations and creating mechanisms within technology, whether it be through software, and once again, these wellness conferences. The state of New Mexico. Uh, there's an organization up Albuquerque's the heartbeat of this state, right? It's where most things happen. It's centrally located. So there's an organization that that hosts an actual wellness conference every year, and it includes things like a session. The person that runs that, Dr. Rogers, Troy Rogers, he's a police psychologist, and he partners with law enforcement, first responding organizations, and there's things like, for example, the first conference, the very first conference they had, I attended, and they brought people in from the fire service, from the EMS side of things, because there's common territory there, right? There's a lot of parallels from one profession to the other. But in this wellness, there was meditation, there was massage therapy, there was a mixed martial arts session where you could go in there and learn a mixed martial art. All of it to be some sort of outlet for the things that people tend to bottle up, right? And then have those interactions. And there were some great speakers. And like I said, I think they're in year 3 or 4 now. And every year it continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? One of the things that we've done locally is we've onboarded technology through applications with different providers. We actually have two providers. One of them that we entered into an agreement with from an agency standpoint. And then just literally a few months ago, we had another opportunity where a volunteer, and her name escapes me, but she knows who she is if she watches this podcast. And I don't know that she did it for the notoriety. In fact, I know she didn't do it. Her significant other, and I'm not, because I don't want to say husband, her partner, was former first responder. I believe it was fire service, but I'm not sure. He had, he had retired, and she made it her initiative to go out and get funding at the local level. And she has acquired the funding to allow us access to another application. And in this application, specific for first responders, specific for police officers, right, you have employee assistance benefits in there where you can reach out to somebody. There's the anonymity of it as well. And don't be fooled. And I'm not proud to say this, but this has to be an honest conversation. I think we're still battling a pretty good stigma in relation to mental wellness. The
Mm.
profession demands you be neutral, detached, unbiased, fearless. The type of personalities that interact or that function in this profession are type A, alpha personalities. And those are some of the challenges that still in today's world, well into this new wellness movement that I support 110%. I wish that some of these resources were available to me at an earlier stage in my career, a lot like what you had mentioned. But it's got to start somewhere, and we're starting there, and hopefully, because we're still seeing, right? Not very many people are registering, right? And that's okay. That's okay, because the thing about it is, as long as the resources there, people will come, and that's what I think organizations have to work towards. Is let's build this resource. The reality of it is for us to think that you could just flip a switch and people are just going to dive into it, right? Come be vulnerable. Of course not. We've been programmed through by evolution in a first responder capacity, whether it be EMS, fire, police. I mean, we're trying to get past decades, if not centuries old ways of, you just you leave a horrendous call and you flip the switch at the next call. It's in our DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I've said this before, but I really envision it as like the Titanic. It's not a jet ski. It's not going to flip 180 overnight. It's going to take time to turn. But I love that you have this mentality of it will happen over time because I think that sometimes we become impatient with change. And I think especially now because we're so used to instant gratification. And of course, we hope, I would love if an entire organization participated in any singular thing on a consistent basis, but it's not realistic. And we know that wellness is multifaceted, like we said before. There isn't one singular training method or one singular resource that is going to attract everybody. And so by having the different options available when people are ready, we have to meet them where they are and hope that when they are ready for those things or they do need those things are available and they have that soft landing that they can refer back to. I've also been talking about this recently, and it's this conversation of level of influence. And they say that really 18% is the tipping point. So if you can get 18% of your organization utilizing something or on board or bought into something, then that's when that kind of domino effect starts to happen at that 18% because there's a level of influence that starts to happen and people start to talk about it and then it becomes more common. But maybe it takes a little while to get to that 18%, but slow building that foundation over time.
Well, you just made my day because I got to tell you, um, I got some raw statistics the other day, and we're in the double digits, and we're an organization of 131 fully staffed positions. But I mean, at 18%, you're talking about, so 13 makes it 10. So if we could get closer to that 20% involvement, I mean, we're there, and yeah, I think things like, and we spoke about technology and applications and stuff like that, but we have a really good peer support foundation within our organization. In fact, unfortunately, last week we had an incident in a neighboring community, and I got to tell you, I want to believe it was at their request, but even if it wasn't, it doesn't matter. We made our services and ourselves available to this neighboring agency and sent some staff members up there. And that I think is the other thing, because we're quick to send a SWAT team somewhere, right? We're quick to send police officers somewhere to support as we combat, crime and those kinds of things. But what a beautiful thing to be involved with your sending a team for wellness.
Yeah, I love it. My last question for you for the day before we wrap, and you've already given some really great words of wisdom and advice throughout our conversation, but for that younger generation, the younger men and women who are entering into the career today, I know you said earlier that there were some things that maybe you wish you would have known or some resources that you wish you would have had when you were younger. What words of wisdom would you share with them that you wish you would have had when you were younger?
I live a little bit of my life. I have it in my signature in my emails. Is people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Mm.
In fact, I believe it's quoted by Maya Angelou, is where that comes from. I would tell you that for your quality of life, if you're coming into this profession, just know you're not the first. If I could give somebody just you're not the first. And we often in my field sometimes see it more on the disciplinary side of things where somebody's done something, right? Somebody's involved themselves with something, and it's like, bro, did you think you would be the first person to have tried this? But I got to tell you, when it comes to emotional, mental, overall wellness, just know, good, bad, or indifferent, you're not the first. And don't let that stigma of, what are people going to say? How are people going to feel? Because to be honest with you, somebody may have already gone through that. And as a result of feeling like they were the first, they're in a position to be there for you in a way because they know that they've been through that already. And what a blessing and opportunity for you to know that you're not the first. Somebody's probably gone through something very similar. It's just an opportunity now it's on you to go out and hopefully organizations, and like I said, I mean, we have these applications, these peer support, and it's been very, very good for us because, under the guise of that peer support, it has allowed us an opportunity to get that behind the scenes information that would have probably not presented had it not been that we not had this resource available. So just know you're not the first to feel sad, to feel weak, to feel vulnerable, to feel scared. Uh, Somebody else has been there before.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated you coming on here with me today.
Thank you for having me. And once again, I think you're doing great things through this. And I hope that together, uh, with your partnership with people that are in my position, we continue to get the word out as to how important this stuff is. And one day at a time. And at the end of the day, I tell myself all the time, if we can change one person's life in the course of doing what we're doing, then it's been a success.
I agree. Thank you so much.